Professor Dacre Stoker. It's a great pleasure to save you in our Vox Vampyrica Podcast English version. We have a long time running show here in Brazil, almost 15 years of Vox Vampyrica, and this is our official first edition on English version. And you are my first interview in this edition, and it's a great honor to have you with us here in this show.
Well, I'm very honored to be number one for the English version of your show. So thank you, and it's a great way to start for me as well. Thank you.
It's really awesome to me. So, Professor, let's start by our first question. May you introduce to our listeners a little bit of your books? Dracula The Un Dead. I think it's the official sequence to the classic Dracula, and the prequel Dracul are two of my favorite vampire books from all times. Tell us a bit of these fantastic stories.
Well, yes, thank you for asking. I guess the story really has to begin with Dracula. My great-granduncle was Bram Stoker, and he wrote Dracula between the years of 1890 and 1897. So I finally read these books when I was a young guy growing up in Canada. When I started reading it, I was only 12 years old, and it didn't mean a lot to me then. But when I was finally in university and I read it again, I started to understand, I would say, the beginning of the full theme of this book. And it's taken me another 10, 15 years to fully understand not only what Bram Stoker was writing, but why he was writing it as well. And it was these two thought processes in my mind that I ended up writing Dracula The Un Dead with Ian Holt, and then Dracul with J.D. Barker. I am a very strong researcher. I'm not a very strong writer, and both these stories needed authors who were better than me to co-author with me to help make the story strong enough and good enough to be published by international publishers all over the world. So to start with, Dracula the Un Dead picks up where the story ends, where Dracula ends. And one of the big premises that many fans and myself has always thought about is the way Bram Stoker ended Dracula. The Count really didn't die in the normal fashion, or the fashion Bram intended it to, which was a wooden stake through the heart and the head being completely cut off. Instead, he had the Bowie knife go into the Count's chest, and his throat was slit, and the Count crumbled, vanished in dust. Does this mean he's really dead? So this problem stuck with me and many other fans, and also Ian Holt. And we said, well, if he didn't die, what can happen? And most importantly, also, what happened to the rest of the band of heroes who did go back to Transylvania 7 years later to pay homage to Quincy Morris, but when they go back to London and they resume their lives, this would have been a very traumatic experience. They had no help by the police. So they would have had to carry this burden within themselves that they had to kill their own Lucy, that Quincy Morris actually died, and that each of them did this incredible service to the people of London by chasing a vampire back to his native land of Transylvania. And in the process, they learned something about themselves, but they also learned about the ultimate evil in the world, and they think they've banished it. So that's the premise for the continuation of the story, and the major character that carries the book Dracula the Un Dead is the little baby who was born at the end of the novel. If you remember, Jonathan Harker and Mina had a child. Well, he's now 25 years old, but the question that enters into the mind of the readers at the beginning is, we also know that Mina had a blood exchange with Count Dracula. And how would this affect the baby as he grows up? And this is what we try to answer in Dracula the Un Dead. So without giving any more spoilers, I think that's probably enough on Dracula the Un Dead. Now, it took me about 10 more years to work out the next problems that I had with further research in Dracula. I had found Bram's lost journal. I learned more in his notes. I had seen the Dracula typescript. So there was more information floating around in my head that brought out some very important points. And that is, why did Bram Stoker write Dracula and make it feel real? As I found things like the original preface to Dracula that said this story is real, not just once, not twice, but 4 times he mentioned this is real. And his London-based publisher discarded this, I believe, because it would have made the book too scary. That preface showed up in an Icelandic version of Dracula and a Swedish version. So it exists, but it's not in the book that many of us knew about for 120 years. So I worked on the premise that this story was based on reality, and I looked deeper into Bram's life. And as a sportsman myself, I had actually coached at the Olympic Games in 1988 in Seoul, the Canadian modern pentathlon team, and I'd seen many things that affect the human body, negatively and positively, blood doping and steroids and human growth hormones, all these crazy things. And I thought about Bram's mysterious childhood illness. How could he have been so sick for 7 years that made him an invalid? And how did he recover to become a champion athlete 7 years after he recovered from being an invalid? And I thought, well, maybe if he wrote this story as if it was real, maybe there was some supernatural intervention in his life. I know he was bloodlet. I think he was bloodlet by one of his uncles. So if they were taking the blood out, and in those days they took out a lot of blood, maybe there was something going back into him. And this is where the author, myself and J.D. Barker, where we brainstormed about what if. And this is what all authors do at some point. You have to take reality, you take the truth, and then you twist a little bit and add some fiction. And here's where we added fiction, that there was some sort of supernatural intervention that made Bram recover. And this is what caused him to write the story Dracula as a warning to the world that vampires are real. Now, it doesn't end there. I found lots of books that Bram researched. I found notes that suggested that he believed there was many people around the world at that time that believed vampires were real. All Bram Stoker had to do was write a story to convince us that this threat, this Count Dracula, existed in this faraway land, and he was coming to London in a very threatening manner, silently coming into your country and really upsetting the center of the world, which was London at the time. So this is how J.D. Barker and I decided to frame Dracul, as if Bram had personal experience and he had to have some connection to Dracula and was going out to try to either solve the problem or get rid of him. So that's the basis for Dracul, and we've had a lot of fun writing it. We've loved the success it's had. It's been an international bestseller. It was the #1 horror hardcover in all of England, all of the UK actually, and it was one of the top 5 horror books in the US when it came out in 2018. So we're very happy with it. And I like the fact that I'm able to bring Bram's life into the fictional world, but most of the story is real. So it's almost like a biography, but in fictional manner. And that makes me feel good that I'm allowing people to understand my great-granduncle.
It's 2 awesome books, and it's a really great privilege to share this time and talking with you, and may listen some secrets of his backstage. It's a great opportunity, my noble friend. And so I have a new question here. Professor, did you enjoy our last night in the party?
Yeah, it was great to see. I didn't have any idea how many people would be in this party. So many people who obviously were very interested in what I had to say. It's very satisfying to see people who are engaged and interested in what I'm having to say about Bram Stoker and Dracula. So yeah, that was really cool to be coming from South Carolina to Sao Paulo and connected through the internet. And to make people enjoy what I have to say is fantastic.
Awesome. It was a great night to us, and people really appreciate too much you with us. We have more of 40 peoples. Now, please share with us a bit more of your search and discoveries from Bram Stoker. When you start searching, some secrets that you discover in Bram Stoker diaries and Bram Stoker personal notes, and what new materials are you developing? More contents, more books with Bram Stoker registrations, notes, and this kind of stuff? Please share a little bit with us.
Well, I think for the listeners, it's important people understand that Bram Stoker left us very little about himself. He never wrote an autobiography. He was a very busy man, being the manager for Henry Irving's theater. So he had time in his holidays just to write his own stories, 12 different novels and short stories. But he did keep a journal when he was a young man in Ireland. And that was a very important time of his life. And luckily, there are two great-grandsons of Bram still alive. They're my cousins. They're in their late 70 years old. And one of them had a box of books and letters and this journal that he said, Dacre, you might want to look at this. And so I looked at it and I thought, oh my God, this is incredible. Oh, up until this point, there had been some biographies written about Bram. There had been the Dracula notes that had been discovered in 1970, and they show up in the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia. And these are the notes, 125 pages of research notes that Bram used for Dracula, but nothing about himself as a person. Details, thoughts, ideas, poetry, early writing. And when I got to look at this journal, that the handwriting was so terrible that nobody else had put much attention to it. One biographer by the name of Paul Murray had an assistant go look at it, but nobody had had a chance to publish it. So Dr. Elizabeth Miller and myself, we decided to transcribe all these notes and publish it. It was 311 different entries over 7 years. And I think probably, Andreas, the biggest secret that I found from that is that Bram wanted to be a writer from an early age, but he was held back by his father. It was conflict within this young man's life. He was a student. He was serious in mathematics. He was also a great sportsman in many ways. He was a champion and with trophies in race walking and rowing and gymnastics, rugby. But deep inside Bram, he loved the theater and he loved romance and he loved this sort of freedom of expression. And he was also interested in these, what we called fringe sciences, mesmerism, phrenology, the occult, things that weren't accepted very well at that time, and ideas that he had to keep bottled up inside him. But then he started writing these in his journal, just as a way of freedom of expression. But they were kept close until he took the job with Henry Irving to move to London against what would have been his father's wishes. But at that time, his father had moved to France and then Switzerland to bring the daughters, Bram's sisters, so they could be educated in the arts. And one of them became quite a famous artist. So once Bram's mother and father were away, Bram had the freedom to do what he wanted to do. And he moved to London. And this is where his freedom of expression in the theater and in writing came out. So this was a young man, 3 scientists in the family, 3 doctors. His brothers were doctors, and one other civil servant, and the 2 sisters were artists. And Bram was really the only male in the family that had this sort of, let's say, less than appropriate career choice. And he got to develop that on his own. So I saw that in the journal, but when I started reading his other books, I could see this as well. This man who had the confidence slowly building up to write about his passion and to be passionate about what he wanted. And that was to be an accepted writer. He only got to write and do his research when he was in his holidays. And what was interesting about his research is he stumbled upon these superstitions, these mythologies, the occult, and this were reflected, this man who chose to have an open mind about life in a society that was very closed-minded about things. This was the end of the 1800s when many changes were coming to Victorian London. And there was many people in high society that were resistant to these changes. Remember, Charles Darwin had just published this very controversial Origin of the Species in 1859, and this was shocked the scientific world. Well, in a somewhat similar way, Bram embraced that, and he did the same thing in Dracula by introducing ideas that superstition and vampirism and spiritualism could be real and is accepted by many people. So he put it into a novel in a way to suggest to people this is something that might be real. So this is what I learned about Bram. These are some of the secrets. And what I've done with that is I look for ways to exploit it. Obviously, in these two books, Dracula the Undead and Dracul, but I've also written a short story that will be coming out this summer in a magazine, called Weird Tales. And it's about Bram Stoker's last week of his life and his beliefs of the afterlife, things that he did in his life that he regrets. And I've also been working on a documentary about my journey to go to Transylvania to find the location of the Bram Stoker's fictional castle that Hans de Roos deciphered from the notes, and we'll get to that in a little while. But you know, there's never a day that goes by that I am not working on something or thinking about something to do with Bram Stoker and things that have not yet been brought to the forefront yet.
And well, this takes us to now our next question. On our site, Rede Vamp, one of the most accessed articles is about your field research with Hans de Roos to locate where Bram imagined the location of Dracula Castle in Romania. Share with us more of this expedition. For me, as a long-time reader of Bram, you was a great experience to read about that, to translate this article. Tell us more of this expedition.
Well, it really started with Hans de Roos and I going to Transylvania together to look at many places associated with Vlad Dracula, as well as Count Dracula, the fact and the fiction. And during that time, he disclosed to me, well, actually, when we got back, he disclosed to me because we went a number of times together, but on one of them, he said, Dacre, I've found something in the notes that nobody else has recognized. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, the notes in the Rosenbach Museum has the page, and because Bram's handwriting is so bad, that a lot of times people who look at these notes have a very hard time looking at them, and some of the writing is faded. And one of these pages had lines of longitude and latitude and names of rivers and streams. Well, Hans knew about, because of a map that he had been looking at, these rivers and streams and lines of longitude and latitude, and then he deciphered the action in the Borgo Pass with the carriage and how long it would take to get from one place to another, how long it would take. And he realized that there must be a spot where these lines of longitude and latitude line up. And, you know, and so this was groundbreaking. I decided I needed to go and see this. So my son and I went on and took a tour with some other people to show them around Romania. And after that tour was over, we decided to go on our own and hire a guide to go look for this place. And we did. We found it. There is no castle, but there's a perfect place for it. Obviously, Bram Stoker never went. He did have maps. And since de Roos's discovery, I found that of all the books in the London Library that Bram was using for his research, 5 of them actually had maps in them. So Bram was very precise, and he was choosing what this location was. They all had the same rivers that Druce had found. They all had the lines of longitude and latitude that Druce had found. So Bram didn't just do this by chance. He chose a particular place because of the physiology of the area, because of the geography of the area and the myths of the area. And the reason was that the ending of Dracula, before it was edited out, had a volcanic eruption occur right after the knife, the Bowie knife, goes into the Count's chest. Massive volcano would erupt, Castle Dracula would come down, gypsies would run off, and somehow the band of heroes would stay safe. This was a sort of Bram's way of connecting what was at the time this portal, this volcano, the connection to the center of the earth where the devil lives. And his Dracula was the devil. And so if the devil dies, the massive eruption, either protesting from the center of the earth that you've now killed our leader. So Bram found an area where there were volcanoes. And he found an area of the mythology of the blue flame, which were included in the book. The blue flame is the sulfur deposits that are exposed when the volcano came up. So this location is actually Mount Israel in the Kalamanalui National Park, and it is an extinct volcano, and there is a sulfur mine right next door to it. And when I went with my son and the guide, I asked other people in the area, what do you know about the myth of the blue flame? Oh, they say it's the sulfur. I say, what do you mean? Well, when we have forest fires from lightning and the fires burn and then the trees stop burning, there is still some burning of the sulfur because it burns blue. And I said, well, is there any truth to the myth that there is treasure under the blue flame? They said, of course. We have gold here as well. We have gold in the mountains. That's why the Dacians were able to discover gold and use it, and that's why the Romans came to overthrow the Dacians to steal it. So this initial trip was to find out, does this place really exist, and what does it look like? And then a year later, I went back with the same guide and some different friends. We actually put a plaque up on a big rock face on the side of this mountain with the blessing of the administration of the national park, who have said that they will actually build a trail and will properly recognize, number one, Hans de Roos's discovery, and number two, what Bram Stoker intended that place to be. And it's wonderful. The only challenge is it's a 10-mile walk from the edge of the park to get there, and then get back is another 10 miles. But I'm being told that they will allow guides to take people in 4x4 vehicles to drive in and out, and maybe only have to walk 2 miles once they get to the really steep stuff.
Wow. It must be a great adventure, and I hope one day you take me, Chandra, and our friends through this trail. We want to visit this place.
It would be cool. I'll tell you something, Andreas. On the first time I went, the weather was not very good. It was drizzly, cold. It was in October, and it was September, but still it was not very nice weather. We felt like Jonathan Harker, going to a strange place. We felt that we were vulnerable, and as the weather started to change and get bad, we had to get down fairly quickly. We were worried about wolves or bears or something. The second time we went, the weather was beautiful, but nonetheless, there is a great feeling, a real cool vibe in the area, which would be very, very good for tourists to come and see. Plus, there is a wonderful bed and breakfast run by a friend of mine, Radzescu, Casa Rajes Louis, and he said he would be very happy to create a nice meal at this location next to the plaque, so we could have a nice toast and have the same meal that Jonathan Harker had when he arrived at the castle, the chicken paprikas and the golden Miriash wine.
Well, we'll will be great. We need to realize this, my friend. We need. I see a file in my researches on the internet, an interview of Bram Stoker speaking something about sleep paralysis and some lines about what the people call of lucid dreams. Did you find some notes about this, about Bram Stoker, views about sleep paralysis? Lucid dream, these influences, I think that this influences Dracula romance, right?
Absolutely. And I'm really happy that you brought that up because I believe many things Bram puts into his writings are influenced by his personal experience. And I think that during the first 7 years of his life, when he was sickly, invalid, lying in bed, fevers, not knowing if he was going to live, maybe be buried prematurely if he's misdiagnosed like other people in that time, that he suffered very bad dreams himself. And so as a young boy, having this trauma, he grows up and has an interest in reading and try to understand, why did I have this? And then he realizes, well, other people have this. So this is not crazy thinking. I actually found 2 books in the London Library that Bram listed in his research. One by a medical doctor, Herbert Mayo, and the other by a priest, Reverend George Lee, that actually listed things credible like sleepwalking, trance, ghosts, spiritualism, trance walking, symbolism, dreams, bad dreams. These are things, if a medical doctor and a priest have the confidence to write a book about this during this time of change in Victorian England, it must be considered to be a serious subject. And as I read those books, because I went and bought copies of those same books in the London Library, and I could read what Bram was reading, I can see why he believed this stuff to be true and why he inserted these into the novel, Dracula. There's one of my favorite lines for the book, chapter 2, when Jonathan Harker has arrived at the castle. He's had this very difficult trip to get there, scary trip. He's not sure where he is, why he's exactly in this strange location, and what the customs and things are. He says, I'm tired, I'm going to go to bed. And the Count says, have a good sleep. There are bad dreams for those who sleep unwisely. And Andreas, I think that is typical of what Bram's personal beliefs are. Because that line, what it means is, when people have bad dreams, that's a connection. That's a point in their subconscious part of their life when they're connecting to another world, when they're connecting to the occult. Mm-hmm. And so what Bram is writing is that Harker is experiencing a thin veil between living and dreaming, and the connection between the two. When he's awake, is he really awake, or is it simply another dream? When he's dreaming, he has no control over the bad dreams coming into his mind and taking over. And I think what is really interesting about this is that because Bram experienced it himself, I'm sure he probably considered it, that he experienced it himself, that he uses it in his novels. And so, yes, I'm glad you found these things. And there is more in these books, about the presence of the occult and so on. Your listeners need to understand that in this time of the world, seances and spiritualism were something that very smart people were considering. One of them was Arthur Conan Doyle, the writer of Sherlock Holmes, who was a good friend of Bram Stoker's. He was a true believer in spiritualism. Mark Twain, the famous American author, was a neighbor of Bram Stoker's. And he has gone on record as being a member of these psychic societies and believing in spiritualism. So it's not just kind of crazy man's thoughts. This is sort of serious focus that people had. And what's cool is that it shows up in this novel. And last 10 years, people are really realizing, this is what it means. So I'm glad that you've touched on it yourself.
Oh, I'm very happy in listening to this. It's great. It's a great time, Dacre. It's a great time meet. It's a great time. I feel really connected with your idea, your view, and open our mind, principally here in Brazil, where Bram Stoker and Dracula are people's love Dracula, but we don't have enough fonts to see Dracula from a bigger, a greater perspective. And this our talk this evening is one of the best opportunities to show this panorama, this skyline of romance to our audience. And I'm gonna ask you one of my favorite questions on this show this evening. How was the relationship of Bram Stoker and the discreet societies or secret societies from his time? We heard and read much about his possible association with Golden Dawn, but I heard through the grapevine in a place called Fantasy Fest Party Online last Saturday that Bram could be a Freemason too. Is that right?
Yes.
Or
no, again, there are not very many solid records that shows much about what Bram did outside Trinity College, his writing, and the Lyceum Theatre. But I have a friend who's a brilliant researcher and a collector in Dublin, Ireland, that showed me that he believes Bram Stoker attended at least 2 meetings of the Order of the Golden Dawn. People who were thinking alternatively, thinking of big pictures, thinking of sciences and thinking of ideas, spiritualism and things that maybe weren't mainstream and weren't accepted. But I also found recently that Bram was a Freemason, and he didn't become a Freemason until he was in London. So he wasn't one in Ireland. But once he was in London working with Henry Irving, and Henry Irving was a Freemason, and Irving apparently attained a higher level of order in the Freemasons than Bram did. And I believe that's because Bram was so busy. I mean, he was really busy as the manager of the Lyceum Theatre, would stay up till late at night, not just making sure the shows worked, but afterwards with the patrons and so on. And in his holidays, that's when he would go to either Whitby or Cruden Bay, Scotland, do his writing. So I think he embraced the concepts of Freemasonry. I think he enjoyed the opportunity to think and speak freely in a closed society, things that were not necessarily allowed to do or accepted in a tight conservative society. And we also have to believe that because Bram was a theater manager, that people wanted to make sure that they were going to a theater and it wasn't some crazy guy who was the manager. It was Mr. Bram Stoker, therefore everything must be good and serious and focused, not sort of what could be looked at as kind of crazy thoughts. So I wish I had more information, but that's all I have. That still an association with these societies, and I think it's because he wanted to explore the many possibilities of thought and of what the world was looking at the time. I will tell you that one of these thoughts that it's kind of interesting for people to look at, but one is called phrenology, and it is the science that was actually considered quite serious at the time in these societies, that when you look at the appearance of somebody's face, their facial features, their physical features, that you could tell what their character was like. And if you read Dracula and you look for that, or you go onto an ebook of Dracula and do a word search, you will now have a better idea of why Bram describes the Count criminal mind, as a criminal man, and he uses the terminology phrenology a few times in the book, and has Van Helsing say, "Oh, you are a believer in phrenology too." So he does insert a lot of these fringe sciences into Dracula, as he has these beliefs himself.
Now we are talking here, and comes to my mind Pamela Colman Smith, that woman famous by drawing the figurines of Lyceum London Theatre, and to one of the most famous tarot cards from all time is Rider-Waite Tarot. And Pamela was closer of Bram, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Pamela Coleman Smith was this young girl, this sort of street girl that Bram brought in under his wing and helped her have a better life. And she helped doing some paintings at the set designs and things. But she also was a tarot card artist, and therefore had these beliefs herself. And Bram actually had her illustrate the last book that he wrote before he died, The Lair of the White Worm. So if anyone wants to see how, she paid back Bram in a nice way for what he did to help her have a life, that you could see her artistry. There was, I think, 4 or 5 illustrations in Lair of the White Worm by her.
Well, I have a friend here in Brazil called Fabio Mourão. He's a writer and translator, and he's translated Lair of White Worm in Portuguese.
Good.
Yeah, may you send, he probably will listen to this podcast. May you send a regard to him, a hug?
Well, yes, I'm sure Fabio would know this, and congratulations on translating it. It is a bit of a strange story because sadly it's the last thing he wrote, and Bram had suffered a stroke at the time. So some people believe it's a little disjointed because maybe his brain was not 100% at the time. But well done, Fabio, and hopefully you'll be able to enjoy those illustrations. Hopefully they've transferred into your Portuguese edition as well.
Thank you. And now, my noble friend, I'm your fan and fan of Bram Stoker, and I have a question that I can lose this opportunity to make this question to you. So, one of my favorite parts of Dracula's romance is when Jonathan Harker arrives in the Dracula castle. Then he is very welcomed by Count, and Dracula takes Jonathan to an 8-chamber hall where Jonathan will be his roast along 8 to 9 days. But Jonathan has no windows there, and just a mysterious candlelight is inside in a lantern, but we can see from where it came the light in this land. So he stay in this place haunted. In the 9th day, the Dracula's brides appear to him, and then begins a period of time very, very hard to Jonathan. And it's my favorite passage in this book. May you talk about of this part of Dracula's romance, your views? Maybe you find some special note on your researches?
Well, first of all, you're not alone. Many people have said that the first 3 chapters of Dracula are the most powerful, the most sort of inflict the most degree of scariness, because it's a transition that many of us could go through ourselves. We can see ourselves going and doing work somewhere, artistic work, business work, scientific work, get on a train, get on an airplane and go somewhere. And you arrive there and you think, oh, everything will be fine. I have confidence in what I'm doing, but you're vulnerable to the customs, the language, and your host. So as Jonathan Harker, the very confident young British lawyer, heads off to Transylvania and begins to get little hints along the way that things won't be the same for him here as they were in London, and therefore you're not as powerful and don't have control over everything. So he gets to this place, and I would just tell you this, what is really interesting, Andreas, is we found that this octagonal room really exists in a castle in Scotland, in the town of Cruden Bay, where Bram actually went there 13 summers and where he actually did most of the writing of Dracula. And it's called Slane's Castle. A good friend of mine, Mike Shepard, who is an author, wrote a whole book, When Brave Men Shudder, about Bram's time in Cruden Bay and his visit to Slane's Castle, which ended up with Bram describing in chapter 2 the interior of Slane's Castle as the interior of Dracula's castle. Remember, the fictional castle sitting up on Mount Israel. It's not really there, so he has to have something in his mind, and it helps if he's had experience to figure out how you get in the front door. The Count brings you to the octagonal room, lit by a single lamp, interior room, no windows to the outside. So again, it is a real-life situation that Bram has experienced that he puts into the story, and then, as you just say, adds all the cool twists about the Count coming in and breaking his mirror when he's trying to shave, which is very strange. Him going off and finally getting out of this room and visits the three women, and things begin to get really strange. And it takes Harker a while to get to the point, and it's my favorite part of the book too, when he gets to that point and he's realizing the doors are locked, the Count's acting strange, he gets me to write these letters, and then he looks out the window when he finally gets to a window and sees the Count coming down the wall like a lizard, upside down. And that, to me, is this aha moment when he realizes this is the supernatural. I'm in trouble. I'm a prisoner. And everything in that stage in the book changes. He realizes this is bad. This is really bad. And that to me, just like you, that's a really cool part of the book. And again, based on a certain degree of reality, to make it feel, to bring out the vulnerability to the readers. This could happen to you.
Yes, perfect. It's a great passage. I confess that I read this passage. It's a part of the book that I read most times in my life. I really love the atmosphere, the sequence. It's a masterpiece. It's great. So let's go to our next question. Dacre, did you appreciate the recent versions of Dracula? The Dracula of NBC or Dracula on Netflix, this recent version from beginnings of this year, Dracula of ABC from 10 years ago, and maybe the blockbuster Dracula Untold. How do you see these new versions of Dracula, these new perspectives?
Well, it's one of the questions I get asked the most is, oh, what do you think about this book? What do you think about this movie? What do you think about this TV show? It's not the same as Bram Stoker's Dracula. And so my usual response is, okay, it's not the same. If everyone was the same, we'd be very bored with it. I embrace the concept of different inspirations, different adaptation, different versions of it. This is artistic freedom at its best. And what I love is the fact that this work that Bram Stoker wrote, published in 1897, has inspired over 600 movies. 600 are in a book by a friend of mine, a professor, John Browning, that have Dracula in it. Not just the movies, not the stage plays, the musicals, the comedies, everything. So I tend to be very open-minded about different versions. But since you asked, I'll tell you. I think what's cool is, number one, the 1992 Coppola version with Keanu Reeves, Anthony Hopkins, Gary Oldman. I thought that was very good. It was not the same as the book. It introduced romance. Okay, it introduced the whole idea of romance between the Count and Mina, thinking that was his wife had come back to life. So, but that was an interesting concept. You know, somewhat same, followed somewhat the same pattern of the book, but added another element, the romance, which then spurned all kinds of romantic vampires all over the world in other areas. The most true version of Dracula was a BBC version done in 1977 with Louis Jourdan as the Count. If you want something that's very similar to the book, go see that one. But if you want to see something, again, very different, the NBC version with Jonathan Rhys Meyers was good, but it was very, very different. Set in a different time, obviously, and they were looking at electricity and power as sort of the new world order. And then Dracula Untold, which I liked, has nothing to do with Bram Stoker's Dracula, but it is a whole nother look at a myth in how Vlad the Impaler became a vampire, which we realize in history didn't happen. That's fictional. Vlad the Impaler did not drink blood. He did all kinds of other things, and he was a very effective leader on the side of Christianity. But it was I thought, a very good movie to create its own myth on how this could have happened. And then very recently, the BBC version that came out on Netflix, the co-production that the two writers from Sherlock, Moffat and Gatiss wrote, again, very original, but very different than Bram Stoker's version. But I thought it was good time to bring, something original in. They touched on, there was 3 segments of this, and 2 of them I thought were amazing. The first one in the convent, that Bram Stoker introduced Sister Agatha in his novel, but didn't go very far with it. And then the second one, the second session in the ship, the Demeter. In the novel, we only see a ship's log. We don't see much drama in it. So these 2 writers really did a good job exploiting small parts of the novel and filling out a version of this that we don't normally see in the novel. And then, without giving a spoiler away, the very last segment was sort of a time jump, let's just say, which entered some very interesting elements into the story, which was, I thought, a little bit confusing. And but nonetheless, some people loved it and some people didn't. And that's just the way movies are and streaming is. There's so much of it you can pick and choose. But I think it's all good. And I think Bram would have been thrilled that even in this day and age, people are interested enough to adapt his story, to be inspired by his story. After all, he was a theater manager. What's better than a long run in a theater for your famous work?
Yes, I personally liked from Dracula Untold. I find an interesting movie. I just feel the fault on the character. I did see Dracula Untold as a monster. He was more a kind of Batman than kind of Mysterio as a monster. More Dracula from romance. My last question for this interview. Dacre, tell us more about a possible movie adaptation of your book Dracul. Did you have a possible date of your premiere, pre-production? How is going on this project today?
Well, I guess you have to understand that authors of a book, even though it becomes a bestseller, we're not in Hollywood. We sell the option for the film rights to Paramount, who say they're going to make a movie. And then the option is about to run out, and they extend the option for another 18 months. Mm-hmm. We're told that they are in the process of turning the book into a screenplay. We don't have any power over when that happens or how that happens. That's a separate business that, even though I'm passionately connected to it, we let these guys do what they do best, and that's understand when movies are made, how movies are made. If we had decided to make this film independently, and if J.D. Barker and I were going to be actively involved in making the movie, that would be another story. There's a lot more risk involved in that. But we decided to go with an established theater, Paramount. They've got a good track record. They've got great people. And I believe they will do a good movie. They will ask us from time to time what we think about certain things, our opinion on actors and things, but we haven't got to that yet. So in the meantime, I try not to get obsessed with it. I simply move forward and work on other projects and hope that soon I will get this wonderful email from our agent and says, okay, guys, they want you in the writer's room. They want to talk to you about this. What do you think? And that would be a great day. But until that happens, I know that there's lots of things going through their mind. For instance, how they're doing business, how they're making films in this pandemic, how lockdowns are affecting all of them. So I will give them lots of leeway and just look forward to the day when it happens.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dacre, was a great pleasure have you with us in this premiere of Vox Vampyrica English version. It was a great honor to me to pass this time with you, talk with you, listen you, and man, thank you so much by this interview this evening. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, and I thank you for taking the interest. I get a lot of requests for interviews, and I always look at the questions and I say, look, is this going to be worth it? But what's wonderful is these are very good questions, and I hope that your listeners enjoy listening to them as much as I've enjoyed explaining them and chatting with you. So I thank you for giving me these questions and also the time that you take to turn this into the first English interview. So good luck with it, best of luck with it, and we'll just say one day we need to either meet in Romania on a trip to see these sites, or maybe in Brazil sometime in the near future. So thank you all very much, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much.
Se você gostou deste vídeo, deixe um curtir, compartilhe com pessoas afins e visite sempre o nosso portal redevamp.com.